Hello everyone, Squis here. Welcome back to the book show. Please spread the word. And if you want to read the books, I'll leave a links at the back as well as also in the description, A lot of things in the description of books, which is interesting. But that's actually, by the way, writing a description for me is actually the hardest part of them all. I think you need to be a bit of a poet or use AI these days to write a good description, and it's actually extremely important because that's what you read before you actually read the book. Unless, unless of course you know it already, you heard about the book, you want to read it, or you know the author or whatever. But I struggle, to be honest, with writing descriptions. For me, it's just so hard. To write a book to me is nothing. Book writes itself. It's first it writes in your head. So you have a basic outline of a book in your head already before you even start writing. And then when you do the actual writing, that's where you actually then, put a little bit of fat to it. But the book is in your head, and it will bother you until it gives birth. Or until you start writing it. I mean, you can't really ignore a book. Once it's in your head, it wants to come out. But it's interesting because sometimes when I write a book, I actually have no clue how it's going to end. The only thing I do know is that the main characters like Angelique and Foxtrot and Gilslong and very beloved, they will not die. They might get injured, but there's no way they're going to die. But sometimes, like I say, when I write a book, and this is one of them, the one I want to speak to you about, codename Honeybee, is one of those which took a turn by itself. And that's why it's very hard for me to actually explain it to you, because it is a true um, espionage type of novel. In other words, there's twists and changes in it which no one could have foreseen, including me. I would write at the next moment, something came up and then something comes from that and something comes from that. And it's a total plot which is very twisted in many ways. It's impossible to predict. And that's nice. That's nice. The other interesting thing is with most books, I wouldn't know the name of a book until I'm at about page 250, 300. But with this book, Codename Honeybee, let me show you what it looks like. I actually have a recent copy of it because this is the cover, the original cover, which Rebecca then changed and then we brought it back again. But this is what it looks like. Those of you with mountaineers, you will recognize this mountain. I think it's Arete, which is a French word, by the way. I think it means to slow down or to stop. But this is a mountain in the Drakensberg. And there's a very good reason why I chose this place, because you'll see there's a bit of a ledge around about here. And that is in the book anyway, where the spy masters, where they actually meet. This book 10 in the James J series. So it's one of the early books. It's a great book. It follows on Codename Odette. Odette is also a book which I really enjoyed. It's one about codes and ciphers, and I will make an episode on that book as well, probably tomorrow. We'll see. Where I give a warning to Western intelligence that they are actually penetrated. And they are penetrated because they don't believe in betting. I think it's very wrong and harmful, actually. It does roll our eyes. No. Now, let us give a silent prayer because these people need prayer. They're that stupid. I think it's harmful and wrong to ask somebody if you some a certain sexual orientation or you're a certain religious group. They don't want to know such things because it's wrong to ask somebody that. Now, if you read the other books of the earlier spies, that's up to the middle 90s, early 2000s, these people would all say to you during the vetting process, which was very thorough, they would be asked, are you queer by chance? Or are you homosexual? Or are you lesbian? Or are you What church are you from? Are you a Muslim or are you a communist? They ask all these questions. There's reasons why they do that. And they also look at your background to see if you have any tendencies to this type of thing. And then they also look at your family, they look at your friends. They really do a complete background check on you. Firstly, to prevent penetration agents to get in. And secondly, because, every country's intelligence service is supposed to follow its political masters. Let's laugh about that when we hear about the Catholics in action, the CIA. Mind you, they do follow the Antichrist. They follow Rome, not so much Washington. But these days, of course, Washington being the second beast of the Bible, of the books of Daniel and Revelation, read Oath of Evil. Yeah, there I go. Within 7 minutes, Oath of Evil. Yeah, but it will be revealed there and you will understand what I mean. So they actually do follow Rome. Very close working relationship with the Jesuits and very close working relationship with the Vatican Intelligence Service, which is basically the Jesuit order. But of course, all the priests report. I mean, it's the Jesuits just put everything together and would be behind all the shenanigans. But nominally, anyway, on paper at least, they're supposed to follow their political masters. So you would expect to be a good communist to be in the KGB or the GRU. Logical, isn't it? Even on paper. If only on paper. You know what I mean. And the same with the Catholics in action, the CIA, the FBI, which I call the Clinton Whitewash Bureau, because that's what they are. Or used to be. They now moved on to the Biden Whitewash Bureau, which of course exactly what they are. Or let us hate Trump Bureau, which is exactly what they are. Or let's cover for the Epstein murder. Yeah. How far shall I go? I can go on for days like this, but let's not. But you wouldn't expect a communist or something to be in their ranks, would you? Now, what's the difference between communism, socialism, and fascism? It's actually basically the same thing. And it all comes from the Catholic Church. Yes, that's where it originated. It's the Oath of Evil. And other books where I actually describe to you what fascism is and socialism and where it comes from. And how one of the biggest thinkers, Aquinas, he's the one who actually started with this idea that yes, you can have private property, but at the end of the day, it is subjected to the will of the people in the sense that would there be a need for your property, then of course for the greater good, you can take this property. Now this is fascinating because that is exactly what fascism and socialism and communism and all these things are. Communism went a little bit further and said no private property whatsoever. The state will have everything and the state will use it for the greater good. But virtually the same concept. There's no real difference. You need to be a PhD to really understand the difference there. Which is fascinating because this means that yes, you can have a car. Yes, you can even have a house. You can have a farm, whatever you want. But if I have a need, if I have a great need to take your car, then I can take it and there's nothing wrong with it. That's the Catholic system. That is Thomas of Aquinas. That's where it started. And then, of course, it went through. The Jesuits took it over. And guess what? Most of the people involved with the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution, all of them with Jesuits or Jesuit backgrounds or influences upon them. How interesting, because, the Jews are always being used as a scapegoat. And if you think how much the Catholic Church hates Jews, especially the Jesuit order, just go and look at the oath. Don't believe me, go and look at the oath. I will quote for you. They say, I will go even as low as to become a Jew. Yeah. And I think in my latest book, named Snake 606, or latest when I talk here, it might be more when you listen here. I do discuss from a legal viewpoint the so-called apology from the village idiot Pope Francis, where he said that they forgive the Jews for having murdered Jesus. And he also said something like, it should not be held against the Jews of today. It was not an apology. You have to understand something. Rome does not change. And since Rome cannot change and does not change, because when the Pope speaks in a certain way, then of course it's God himself speaking, so he cannot admit he made a mistake. So from a legal viewpoint, that's a non-apology. It's nothing. It's really nothing. It's as good as it's just rubbish. It's rubbish in law. It's rubbish anywhere else. But anyway, doesn't matter. Indeed, you wouldn't expect communists to be in the FBI or CIA, but you do get a lot of socialists, and you also get, of course, these people who's totally orientated towards the first beast, which serves Satan, the dragon. And that's why you see all these things, It is fascinating the double games they play. I've been talking about it before, the Hegelian dialectic and so forth. And in this book, sort of a Hegelian dialectic is indeed playing off. But what I wanted to do in the book is, in codename Honeybee, is to show you that with spy masters, and I really talk senior people now, very senior people, they do meet, they do know each other. You can imagine if you've been doing this job for 20 years or 25 years and you're at a fairly senior level, by that time you've met your mates, your equal numbers and higher or lower up to a point. In Britain, you would have met them. In the US, you would have met them in, wherever, because the West has the entire system, which they call the Five Eyes, which I believe is Britain, UK, America, New Zealand, and Australia. I think those 5 countries share their intelligence. In fact, they share it so much that I believe they have one computer database, and then anybody and everybody with authority can actually access it, and they work very closely together. Why? Well, it's something which started after the Second World War. I mean, before that, the US didn't really even have the external intelligence agency. They had the FBI for domestic, and they had FBI members in the embassies across the world. They did a lot of code breaking. They could break the Japanese codes. So they weren't totally in the dark, but they weren't going out like MI6 and the rest to, secure. That's a fancy word, other people, and to get them to spy and things like that. It was only after the Second World War when America actually became very, very powerful. Before that, it was just a little, very big country, but not an important one. It became important after the Second World War. Now, just yesterday, I was speaking about Albert Pike in his book Morals and Dogma. And in that, Albert Pike was one of the greatest occultists, in other words, Satan worshippers known to man. He wrote this book called Morals and Dogma, and then it has a very long further title, as it was in those days in the 1870s, 80s. And he predicted 3 world wars. He predicted the first one, which happened, and it was supposed to break Germany as well as the British Empire, which is sort of dead. Why Germany? Well, yeah, where did the Reformation start again? Let me hear. Yeah. Started in Germany. Martin Luther, even though Jan Hus and those people were before him. But it really took off in Germany. So Germany had to be punished by Satan. Yeah. And it was, and it is. Still do, up to this day. Then, of course, came the Second World War, which was supposed to make America the greatest country on earth. And that actually worked out well. Yes, it did. Became a mighty Protestant country, one of the mightiest, probably the mightiest one ever. And Bretton Woods, the new financial order which they created after the war, that Roosevelt fellow, Franklin Delano, 33 degree Freemason, yeah. Winston Churchill, 33 degree Freemason, relic priest, yeah. All of them, man. All of them. It's interesting. But anyway, Roosevelt made sure that the British Empire had to pay. They had to pay for all the weapons. And so they broke them. They broke them financially. They were gone. And from that arose the US. And then the US started changing. The US became the second beast, which it is today. All the signs are there. It's not a mighty Protestant country now, it's a failing Catholic one. If I say Catholic, guys, I don't hate Catholics. I have to say it in every episode. I say it many times in books. I'm just explaining you the biblical prophecies here. And all of these things links together because these spy masters actually meet with each other. And they have to, because if you have something like 5 eyes, and there's now up to 20 eyes, I mean, it just went up as they added more and more countries together. France for a long time was not part of it, but then France also sort of, lost the Gaul's influence, its Gaullist influences became lost with time, and now we're just a little chihuahua of a US. Shame it's hard to see. So anyway, this Albert Pike guy, he not only predicted the Second World War, he also predicted the Third World War, which will start in the Middle East. My theory is it will be started by Israel in some way or form or another. Because if Israel is seriously under threat, the US will have to come and help. And you might find Russia and China on the other side. So it might explode into a major war across the world, which I think the US will lose. They will definitely lose. They don't have... Anyway, read the American Military Might Debunk, and you'll find out why I say so. Read any of my books. It is really fascinating. Since we're on the topic, there is something actually in Codename Honeybee. I'll tell you now about Honeybee, what happened in it. But let me tell you something else. It's about counterterrorism in Sub-Saharan Africa. I sort of mentioned it in other books as well, but in this one I went out all the way. And I say here that since I wrote this book, and it was done with all GMJ books to impart knowledge and to warn, educate if you wish, things got worse for the US in Africa. Now, below, what I was going to quote to you below is known everywhere except in the Pentagon and the White House. And this statistics I'm quoting to you now is a few years old. It's actually worse today, much worse. You can actually double what I'm saying here because nothing has changed except for the worse, if you understand what I mean. And this is about jihadism. The jihadis, the Muslim radicals, which always features in my books anyway. It was a major target. There's a major opposition. So anyway, what they're saying here is that, and this is the Defense Department of Africa Center for Strategic Studies. Not my words, it's their words. Like many places in my books, I would quote these people, I would give them credit, and it just shows you that my views are not wrong. They say that overall militant Islamic groups' activity in Africa has doubled since 2012. Yeah, you can make it 5 times now. There are roughly 24 active militant Islamic groups operating in the continent. Yeah. Up from just 5 in 2010. Yeah. There's 13 African countries which face attacks from these groups. It's a 160% increase over that same time span of 2 years. And the number of violent events across the continent has jumped 960%. Yeah. It went from 288 violent attacks in 2009 to 3,050 in 2018. It's worse today. It's much worse. As I say, this is from a Defense Department Africa Center for Strategic Studies. So what did the US do? The US they have to meddle everywhere so they can cause even more chaos. That's what they're doing. It's order up call. It's a Jesuit principle where you create chaos, and from that comes order. That's a principle. I speak about it a lot in Oath of Evil and other books as well. But let's see what they did. So they created something called Africa Command. It's based in Stuttgart, Germany. There was not a single country in Sub-Saharan Africa who wanted them, including Nigeria. So they're operating from Germany, of shame. And US Africa Command, whenever I say those words, I roll my eyes and I say, oh, shame, oh, shame. But let's see. Let's see. So in 2008, they began operations. Okay? Isn't this interesting? That's exactly the time when it started doubling, when a terrorist attack started doubling. So the number of US military personnel on African continent had jumped by 170%, from 2,600 to 7,000. It's a lot more today. It's about 14,000. The number of military missions, activities, programs, exercises has risen 1,900%. Yeah. So they went up with a crap from 172 of these missions to 3,500. Yeah. This is the 2019 statistics. It's a lot more today. Drone strikes have soared, and the number of commandos, and that words we say lightly, they what do you call them? Low standard troops, but let's call them commandos. I like that word. Let's call them special forces, but they're not worthy of the word special forces. Not really. But anyway, the number of these commandos deployed has increased, along with the size and scope of AFRICOM's constellation of bases. The US military has recently conducted 36 named operations and activities in Africa. Now, when you name an operation, it means it's a major operation. Otherwise, it doesn't even have a name. They gather intelligence, they conduct surveillance, carry out airstrikes and ground raids, focused on countering violent extremists on the African continent. This was written by Nick Turse. I believe he's a professor, American investigative journalist, historian, and author, written in July 2019. Again, guys, it's much worse today, but that's what happened. Yeah. So what you had here is a lot of extremism suddenly in Africa. When came the Americans, yeah, and suddenly it went up with 1,900% of their involvement, and suddenly it jumped with 960% more incidents. Yeah. Of course, you can say to me, well, with mere presence, we would make more contacts and combat between the two groups. Yeah, but it's much worse. It's much worse than that. And there's so many other statistics which I can quote for you that it just shows to you these people have no flipping clue what they're doing. They have absolutely no clue what they're doing, and because of that, the continent is burning. So you have to look at this from the background. Whenever I write a book, we always have this in the background, because these people, Angelique and mates, are actually trying to combat terrorism. And there are many ways to do it, and there's many specific operations. And sometimes you really don't know who's your friends and who's your enemies. Because you might be having tea with a spy master from MI6 or God help us, the Catholics in Action somewhere. Actually, they never really feature in my books. I write. I rate them so low that that I thought to myself, it's not worth my while to even mention them. I think you only hear about the CIA in 2 books, and that is in Codename Elise, where I think a unit of them actually, well, a few of them died. Of course, not really. They used contractors, but the contractors anyway had mysterious accidents, and one of their drones was destroyed on the ground. Which, why did I tell you? Why did I reveal that? Simply because it's very easy to do. We know exactly where the drones are. So it's very easy for us to sabotage those drones and go and kill everybody inside that place. Because even though the drone operators would be hiding away in Las Vegas, they're close to there. That's where they have a camp, where they run these operations from. And I do write about them, how they use music, under this dark underground type of music. It's hard rock, which of course is how it influenced them. Many of them just turns out to be druggies. And yeah, read Voices, War Crimes, USA, and you will learn a lot about the US drone strike program. In fact, during Obama's time, they killed 96.2% of the time the wrong people. Yeah, yeah. 96.2% of the time failure rate. It's amazing. And the drones, the price went up from about 8 or 9, yeah, $5 million to now about 40. Yeah. You would have thought if more drones are built, the price would come down. No, 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 no. Of course not. You have to make money. Lots of money. US taxpayer, you're such an abused fellow. Lots of things I can talk about the drone program. I should make a video on it, actually by myself, on itself, as a topic, because it became so bad that it was actually moved away from the US military, where there are certain people who are still there with a little bit of honor left in them, many of them actually. And they started asking questions which couldn't be answered, so they moved the program entirely to the CIA. Why? So that you can't find out about it. Just declare it a secret, and so they don't release any information because they can't. Because if you, as an American listening here, and you really want to know, well, how would you feel if drones start killing your family? Which got nothing to do with extremism whatsoever. They're just being drunk. And there's no comeback. There's nothing you can do except to go and kill the first American you can see and which you can find in your country. That's what's happening. It's pathetic. But anyway, that's a drone. And the problem we have in sub-Saharan Africa now is because the US is involved. And if the US is involved, you'll find the little chihuahuas. You will find the Brits. You will find the Germans. Yeah, the rifles don't work in the African heat, by the way. Shame. The helicopter, I think it's called the Tiger. It's an attack helicopter. Yeah, it can't fly here because it's too much dust. Yeah, it's too warm. Yeah. Too high. But you still have you ask a question, why the hell are you outside your borders? Your constitution always said you will not do this. You will fight inside. Then came a war on terror. You changed your constitution basically, and you started sending your people to war zones. Yeah, brilliant. Now you're threatening Russia. Oh, you're so whatever, Germans. You're gonna get what's coming to you. So anyway, point I'm making is in codename Honeybee is there is an entire worldwide anti-terror operations going on. Every country has its own unique position on it. And many times they're on both sides. You don't really know where they stand. You don't know who's your friends. You don't know who's your enemies. And Angelique Dawson has the same problem in this book. Because it became clear to her that she has radical elements from Islam inside her units. In other words, there's people inside her service who wants to kill her. Why? Because she's following her own head. She's not sympathetic to the Muslim cause at all, meaning the jihadi cause is not sympathetic. And she sees them as the enemy. And besides that, she also sees the far-right wing as the enemy as well. Angelique is somebody who walks in the middle of the road. It is like Eisenhower said, if you walk in the side of a road, you walk in the gutters. So you would expect the silent majority to be, the ones walking straight. But anyway, that doesn't happen because he also has to follow the orders of superiors in Pretoria, in the books anyway. And so they tried to kill her, and they tried to kill her the first time in codename Sanford, which is two books before this one, which we'll talk about later. Then they tried to kill her again in codename Odette, which is the one before this one. And then here in this book, she's now at the stage where she realized that she cannot trust these people, and she wants to meet the Western spy chiefs, the spy masters in secret. And to do that, she arranged to meet them at this mountain, which I showed you, this very mountain, which is a hard mountain to climb. So she make arrangements that they will meet on that ledge. They will sort of be like campers, mountaineers. They would climb up, they'll have like a barbecue, and then the spy masters will chat. So the spy masters, his meeting is very interesting because both of them are major role players in my books, but both of them are actually, from a South African viewpoint, as a BRICS nation, are seen as enemy services organizations. They're not really seen as friends anymore. They used to be in our time, many years ago. But later years, when South Africa became the new South Africa, which ain't new anymore, it's just run down, things have changed dramatically, very dramatically, with the existence of BRICS. And of course, as Mr. Mandela said, and I say this in many books, your friends ain't my friends. And the entire foreign policy of South Africa is, what did you do for us during our struggle? Yeah, America, what did you do? UK, what did you do? Well, both of them allowed a whole bunch of protests and movements and things inside them. They did help these people a lot, but they didn't supply training or weapons, as far as we know. There's others who say differently. But they definitely also assisted the apartheid state in certain ways by blocking the worst of the United Nations crap. There was a relationship because the old South Africa, the apartheid state, was always a capitalist, NATO-orientated place. And South Africa is very important to NATO, or it used to be, very important now to BRICS, because it controls the Cape of Good Hope. So they don't really like the West, to be honest. And well, I don't like the West because of what the Bible says about the West and what I see in the West. My dislike is biblical. Their dislike is totally political. There's a huge difference between the two. But you can figure that one out, I'm sure. So she meets up with Israeli intelligence and she meets up with French intelligence. And these characters would appear in the books many times. The Israelis appeared first in Codename Angel, Mrs. Arik and Arik himself. They appear a lot of the times, and you have somebody called Lemonbaum, who's on the French side, of a guy called Sebastian. By many of the books. Why? Because the point I was trying to make to you in this book is that the spy masters do talk to each other. But you would actually then expect them to tell the truth when they speak to each other, and they normally do actually. Funny thing that. It is many times to prevent misunderstandings, it's many times to prevent war, it's many times to end a war. If you think about Italy, Italy actually surrendered because of the spies. They approached, I think, Alan Dulles in Switzerland, Swineland, and they negotiated the surrender of northern Italy in 1945, and they used their spy networks to do that, and that's exactly what happened. You know what happened further? Mussolini was captured, and he was hanged upside down together with his mistress. Yeah, so I say in one of the books that reminds me very much of Gaddafi's death. Strange how history always repeats. So when these spy masters actually meet at a certain level, they tend to be close meetings, where bodyguards and people are left outside. The Americans and the Brits, of course, will never do that. They will always have somebody there to lie with them, or to be a cover at least, that there were no secret deals made. Things like that. But in this instance, the spy masters, all three of them are females, all three of them are dangerous, all three of them existed. Lemonbaum and the team died later with the entire team. It's sad what happened there. What happened to the Israelis, I'm not sure. They're probably still around, haven't had contact in quite a while. But anyway, so So these three women sit together and they decide on certain things which they want to do and what they don't want to do. They're basically asking Angelique for assistance. They have an asset in South Africa which is actually Iranian, and they want him to be smuggled out of the country, and then they want him to be killed. That's what it comes down to. But I don't want to tell you the entire story because it's really a good espionage novel. There's lots of twists and changes there, so I don't want to spoil the book for you. You'll have to read it, but it's very, very fascinating indeed on how it turns out and who's lying to who and what's actually happening in the background. And it takes Angelique and mates quite a while to figure out that they're being abused. But anyway, so it is. Also, something which I speak about, which is interesting in the book, we talk about pen guns. Why do I speak about a pen gun? Is these people are at the function at the U.S. Embassy in Pretoria now. There are many such functions there. I attended a few of them myself. There are many such functions. I attended a few myself to see the security measures. We knew all about the security measures anyway because the companies who protect them, the private contractors, reported all to the security agents, to the security people. Yeah, they do. You can try and deny that as much as you wish. You know it's true. And also the internal security, let me say this to you, at one stage in the late 90s, early 2000s, the US Marines at the embassy in Pretoria decided they're going to run their own espionage effort. Yeah. They're going to recruit Special Forces members. Yeah, that was their plan. So what they did is they started holding parties. You know, we had like these almost after parties where they would invite people, and then the sluts and the whores and the drug dealers and all those things also arrived. Many of them working for us, by the way. And they would get themselves thoroughly compromised, and they would also invite Special Forces to come and, you know, see how they operate and so forth. What they never realized is that Special Forces don't rate the US Marines Special Forces by nothing. They rate it as, at the best, perhaps like a parachute battalion. But don't forget that we had an RSM of Special Forces on Legacy Conversations. The main channel said to me that he rated the Navy SEALs not higher than the old parachute battalion. Yeah, it must have heard. But I trust him. If that's what he said, based on his opinion on 38 years in Special Forces, yeah, I believe him. That's what I've seen too. I don't rate them. Not at all. I think they're low standards. They might have 3 or 4 guys out of 10 who I think is good, really good. And the rest are so average they shouldn't be there. So US Marine Recon is actually the one which is rated very highly. In fact, of all the US Special Forces, I rate the US Marine Recon higher than all of them. Why? Because they are very few in number, as they should be. Secondly, they don't believe in going in and just killing indiscriminately. They just don't do that. Thirdly, they are trained in reconnaissance. That's what they do. They do reconnaissance first and foremost. And that's the role of Special Forces. Of course, you can do the counter-terrorism thing as well, all the nice things which people make movies about. But in fact, your first duty is in Special Forces is reconnaissance and nothing more. And there's a lot of people who will disagree. It's fascinating when the Rhodesian Special Air Service came to being, that was the exact outlook. And then they realized that they can kill as well, and sometimes they have to start killing because it took too long for the other forces to arrive to do the killing. So they changed their attitude and said, look, we'll do the killing as well. But it was not the first reason for their existence. If you do some research, you'll know what I'm talking about. So anyway, we were there at the US Embassy, and this fellow needed to be identified. And one of the Mossad operators who also there actually had like a pen in his hand. He was, you know, making notes and things like that. And obviously, the embassy is not on a wartime footing, and with the right cover and background, you can get in. It's not impossible at these functions. There's a lot of people there who shouldn't be there. But anyway, so what he was doing is with his pen, it looks like a laser pen with a dot. He just flashed it at the guy, and that's how we knew exactly who's the target. And then, of course, the target is befriended and blah, blah, blah. You can read the book. But in the book, I talk about pen guns because it occurred to me that if you wanted to kill somebody there right at that premises, you will obviously not be able to smuggle a firearm in because, I don't know how many of you have actually been to a US embassy or consulate. Oh my word. Have you ever seen people who are shit scared? We're so scared that I don't even know why we're in a place like Africa because, really? We're so scared. Oh, shame. They peeing themselves for fear. It is amazing. They don't want to leave their bodyguards. They don't want to leave their walls protecting them, or they think it's protecting them. They want their armored vehicles. Yes, yes. Even if they go to a pharmacy, probably to treat syphilis or something, but whatever. Really not great people. There's nothing about these diplomats in Africa from the US or the West which is impressive. There's really nothing impressive about them. It's not the best people. But that's where they should have the best people because that's where you see China moving in at a great force. In fact, the US is expelled. It's losing its influence. Where China would build a railway line, and no, they're not as bad as you hear on TikTok. Many of them are working perfectly, or they take a harbor over, they do a great job. They build that harbor, they're just doing things which is needed. Of course, there are other reasons why they're doing it. They're not doing it for charity. But the US is just destroying. That's a problem. And when I say US, I mean the West. Just destroying. It's all they're doing. And people are fed up with that. So the pendulum has swung. In fact, Africa is not on the side of the US or the West at all. I've been warning about it for a long, long time. And then when you get to these embassies and you're treated like a criminal in Polsmoor or one of the major serious crime prisons, it's the same. I mean, if they can body search you and strip search you and look up your ass, man, they will do it. That's how flippant scared they are. And yet you are on the invitation list of a VIP. You would expect a little bit of common decency. Yeah. But no such thing. But then don't expect much of a diplomat either. As I always say to you, are useless, absolutely useless. But it's not hard at the same time to penetrate the embassies, and you can do that at will if you have the right connections. And so anyway, so that's how that guy was identified. But then I started thinking to myself that, if you have a pen there which has a laser dot sight on it and you can identify someone, perhaps you can also be smuggling a pen gun. So we started looking at pen gun. It became popular, it seems, in the 1920s for small calibers like a .22. The Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, the Wild Bill, Donovan? Yeah, serious Catholic. Even had an interview with Hitler's Pope. Who was that again? Pius the 12th, something like that. Had the interview with him. Got a huge, very great high-ranking Vatican decoration for it as well. Yeah. Interesting. Do you know that virtually every single CIA director was very fanatic type of Catholics? Do you know that? Yeah, all of them. And if they were not outright Catholics, they were all part of Catholic organizations like the Knights of Malta. Yeah, or they belonged to, Skull and Bones, like George H. Bush. Yeah, all of them. And where do you think these secret organizations and the Knights and those people, who they were report to? Yeah. Look at the signs on the uniforms, guys. Look at the occult signals on it. Look at the Malta cross. Look at the way they greet. Look at it. Everything goes back to Freemasonry in Rome. Everything. All roads leads to Rome. But anyway, so Walpole Donovan, he really liked it. He used to carry one around with him. The CIA, the modern CIA, still have a pen gun which they call the Stinger. It's got nothing to do with a missile. The problem with this thing is, of course, it's a single shot and it's very close range. And they're not supposed to do it by order. I think it was Carter or somebody who brought out a presidential order to say the CIA cannot do assassinations anymore. Yeah, of course. So tell me, idiots, if you start a coup d'etat like you did in 2014 there in Ukraine, yeah, and a lot of people are shot dead by the Ukrainians between themselves, and a lot of people, more than 1 million now, dies in the wars subsequently. Do you think that perhaps has something to do with you starting assassinations? Does it matter if I pull the trigger or my mate pulls the trigger after I give him the go-ahead to pull the trigger, you know? You see, it's a total rogue organization, and it's got nothing to do with, there's a presidential order which says you cannot do that. Now, if you, well, we'll do it. But we'll do it in a different way so that we can go to church on Sunday and kneel there in front of Mary and confess our sins to a Jesuit priest sitting there. Yeah. I don't think God's going to be impressed with you people, to be honest. But luckily, He's a merciful God. Perhaps He will be. I have to pray for you, I suppose. So anyway, the other problem with a pen gun is, and I've seen a few of them, I shot a few shots with one of them. It's a hard thing to shoot with. It's not easily reloaded. You have to cock it first again. It's really awkward. But yeah, they did use it during the Second World War. But it was the Soviets who actually then came up with something that the cyanide gun is much better. They just basically have a pen, it's got atomized cyanide in it, and then you just walk up to a guy, you just spray his face, and bing, there he is. There you die, man. Looks like you had a heart attack. Boom. There you go. Many murders like that took place. I used a lot of Bulgarians to commit the murders. They also had like an umbrella. It's interesting. Well, on my age, you would know about it, umbrella, which I think they used in the streets of London, which has also like a little capsule or something which you just shoot into the guy. And then he dies like that. There was a Georgy Ivanov Markov. He died like that in 1978, I think, in the 70s. In the late 1950s, there was a KGB agent, Bogdan Stanevsky. He actually developed a technique of holding a pen weapon in a rolled-up newspaper and getting close to the unsuspecting victim. Yeah, I know about that. We trained in that as well. It can work, but the problem is you still have to get away. And the major problem today is cameras. There's CCTV everywhere. And especially a place like London and the West has, if you rate how many CCTVs they have in surveillance, you'll be very surprised. They have more surveillance than in the Eastern Bloc, or what was known in the Eastern Bloc. It's fascinating. Even South Africa, especially Cape Town now, I understand they want these telephone poles and then you can have free Wi-Fi from them, or there's some kind of a story with that. Oh, it's for tourism. Yeah. And who else? Who else is listening into it? Huh? Don't think about that. No, it's for tourism. No. Man, you people should really stop trusting. Please, stop. You don't trust your government, and you especially don't trust somebody like Elon Musk and these satellites, which we know is a military asset. Yeah, it's being used in Ukraine against Russia. We know that. Yeah. We also know the military is paying for it. Yeah. And now you want to allow that crap in your country. Yeah. Brilliant. You people are brilliant. Brilliantly stupid, if you don't get my sarcasm. Because anything you do online, guys, is tracked. Some of your phone. Your cell phone is actually the biggest traitor which you have in your organization and in your house. It's actually quite funny. I remember at some time South African Secret Service agents were really struggling to find cell phones without cameras and things, because they couldn't take a cell phone with a camera into the headquarters. So they had to use these old Nokias and things. But even that didn't really work out. Anyway. So So the problem is when you get this poison in your face, is that you can spray the guy next to you, but you might also be contaminated, and you might actually die. So you need somebody close by with an antidote, or you need to be treated beforehand. So so I described one incident. This actually happened, but I won't mention names. Mossad, Israelis, went right in Amman a few years ago. I think in the middle 90s, perhaps a bit later. They decided they're going to murder this one fellow. And how they're going to do it is they had this poison gas in Coke cans. And so what they would do is, and it's ingenious, it's clever, man. These two Mossad agents, this actually happened. They had Canadian passports, but they were not Canadian. They couldn't speak French. They knew nothing of Canadian. They couldn't even speak decent English. Very bad cover, but they didn't expect to be caught. But it's very funny because they walked up with these tins of Coke and they opened it and the things whoosh, it came out and it sprayed this fellow. And this fellow, he knew that there was something wrong here. And so they got arrested, basically. And so in the meantime, this other guy gets very, very ill. And now all hell is breaking loose. So the head of Mossad, or one of the spy masters, actually then made a deal to say that, look, we will give this guy the antidote so that nothing happens to him if you give us our agents back. And now it became a bit of a circus because the Mossad doctor, a very, very beautiful woman, she arrived there and she had the antidote, and they wouldn't trust her that the antidote isn't actually further, what do you call it, for the poison. And so it was, a lot of negotiations going on. The Jordanians, that's where it happened, were not happy with this at all. Not happy with this attempted assassination, but at the end of the day, actually, they did allow her to inject this fellow the antidote, and they did that, and he came right. He survived. How long, I don't know. They probably got him later. Man, we laughed when we heard about the story. One of the agents actually told me the story himself, but you can find it on the internet if you search for it a bit. You might even find pictures of a doctor, which I described to you, very, really, really attractive woman. And so, so it was the Coke can story. Which reminds me, in another book, I think it's Codename Celery 50. We need to speak about that one too. That's the one with the drug labs in Africa, which is being used to make weapons of mass destruction. In other words, biological warfare, germ warfare, yeah. It's in that book. Research a bit, you'll find the newspaper clippings as well, which came out after I published the book. Yeah, strange. But where it also came out that I designed a code which is somehow in Coke. Can't remember exactly how it is, but it had something to do with the DNA in Coke. And then you could get an entire message from it by deciphering it. There was some way they did it. Fantastically clever way of doing things. So anyway, Codename Honeybee, I don't want to speak too much about it. It's, as I say, it's one of those books which I can't really describe in detail because I'll give a plot away, and I don't want to do that. I just want to say that there is a link with Rebecca in this book, and I wrote this book many, many years before I met Rebecca, my wife. And that is that Rebecca at one stage in her life was known as Honeybee. It was a code name. Now, it had nothing to do with the espionage world, nothing whatsoever. She was involved. She had a boyfriend who was into rap music when rap music was just taking off. And so she became involved as a DJ and also as a marketing. She's very good at marketing. In fact, her degree is in marketing. And she then became involved in marketing with rap music and rap artists. So she knows them all. She knows all the famous ones are, sort of friends of her. So in one of her albums, she actually appeared as a model. And Because there's no like pictures, not singing, even though she can sing. She can even rap if she wants to. Horrible music, horrible. This is dreadful. Yeah. Don't like rap music. But anyway, so she appears in one of her albums where she's on the sleeve cover as a model called Honeybee. Yeah, that's how it was. That's how it went.